In a world where even the smallest disagreements can lead to arguments, violence, and even death, two brothers tackle the difficult subjects. Today, in the latest episode of Brother versus Brother, we're going to talk about Section 230. And this specifically references Section 230 of the Telecommunications Act of 1996. And the section states, no provider or user of an interactive computer service shall be treated as the publisher or speaker of any information provided by any other information content provider. And the reason why this is so important, or why it's so much in the news, is that this is the shield that many of the social media companies hide behind when they don't want to be held responsible for what their users are posting, rightly or wrongly. That's the way it's being used, and it's helpful to recognize that when this law came into effect back in 1996, social media did not exist. It was not a word that we used. There was no social media companies on the internet. The reason why it came up at that time is because there were, at the time they called them bulletin boards. They were basically like chat rooms where people would get on, they'd interact with each other. And there were people that were suing some of these internet providers and chat rooms for what people were posting. And the internet providers and chat rooms said, we don't filter what people are saying in these forums. We can't be held responsible for that. And the Congress agreed. Now the question is, does it still apply? Does it still apply in the same way that was originally intended? Or should there be something different? Thoughts?
Yeah, I think um, it was interesting how you phrased that. I'm interested to know what your position is because you said that they hide behind. Um, that phrasing just seemed a little bit derogatory, but I would have thought that you would have gone the other direction, that you'd be supportive of this Section 230. So I'm really interested to hear what your thoughts are. Because my understanding is if you create content, you are liable, or I guess not liable, you're responsible for that content. So you could get into trouble if you create content that, breaks a law in some way. If you moderate content, then you're not liable. That is my understanding. Is that your understanding as well?
Yeah, and so what I found is that they were able to divide it into three different categories. You got publishers, you have distributors, and you have platforms. And publishers, the common one that people understand are newspapers, magazines, broadcast stations. They are considered publishers. They are very hands-on in terms of what is being put out there. They filter and control their content. Distributors is like a bookstore or a newsstand or a library. They are not responsible for the content, but if someone comes to one of those distributors and says, oh, you have content that is either inappropriate or illegal, and then the expectation is that the distributor would remove it if it doesn't fit with whatever the rules are around the holding of that content. And then you have the platforms, and traditionally that was telephone companies. Or the other one they used was cities on whose sidewalks people might demonstrate. So the city is not responsible for the demonstration that is happening on their platform, in this case, the sidewalk. In the same way, the telephone company isn't responsible for what you are saying on their phone lines because they're not
Mhm.
listening to the phone. And then, of course, now we have in the internet. Many of these companies are claiming the position of platform, so that they're not to be held responsible. Although they all have terms of service and certain rules of what they allow and what they don't allow. If it's outside of something that they might otherwise prohibit, they're not responsible for that content.
Yeah, yeah. So I agree. I think there's a distinction to be made there. Um, they they aren't legally liable for something that somebody says on their platform, but they probably would try to offer some tools, or even just to control some of it themselves, to remove certain content that might be offensive to people, because they're just providing a service, and if they don't provide a service that people like, then people won't want to go and participate in that service. So if they have Nazis on the platform, they may kick them off and create a terms of service where they can kick them off, even though they might not be legally liable for the things that those people say.
Right.
And
And
that seems perfectly, I mean, all that seems perfectly reasonable to me. It seems, I don't see how else you could do it. I mean, if you look at Facebook, Twitter, any of these platforms, there's so much happening. It's impossible to try to think that they could moderate all this content and take it down quickly, because there's just so much happening. There's so many people that participate on those platforms. So yeah, they shouldn't be held responsible. And also, I like the idea of people having the freedom to be able to say what they want. I like the terms of service, and I think that makes sense. However, in the past, I have criticized certain platforms for allowing certain things on because I think there's certain things they should do, not because they're legally required to do it, but because it just makes um, either moral or business sense to do something different. If that, I think that's the way they should look at it.
yeah, and it's interesting. I'm fairly certain, like a lot of conversations that you and I have, if we were looking at examples at the extremes, you and I would probably be in agreement. And as you get closer to the middle, you and I might start to deviate a little bit. That being said, I probably align closer to you than to some of the very vocal liberals that have opinions on this sort of thing, because I feel like we've gotten to the point of wanting, a real desire for safe space. And in the process of craving this safe space, we don't want anything that we find offensive to show up in our media in any place. One of the things I've been noticing in some of the threads that I follow, information that's out there, is that there's this expectation among liberals that if someone says something that I find offensive, they should be deplatformed. They shouldn't be given space at all. And I find it a little disappointing that there's this the willingness to sacrifice, everyone having, the freedom to speak in order to make me feel a little bit better about my environment. Now, I think one of the places where this is particularly difficult is where you have where companies will start to promote certain content towards an individual, because one of their goals is to keep you on their site. And so if they can keep you engaged and interactive, that it's not so much about presenting a fair and balanced piece of information. They want you engaged, and people tend to get very engaged when they get very angry, very upset. And so they're not always interested in whether something is accurate. They're just interested in keeping you on the site. And so does their responsibility shift in terms of what they allow, what they don't allow, when they're promoting or curating that content?
Yeah, curating. I don't. Yeah, they're moderating. I guess the verbiage that I understand is if they're moderating content, they're not liable.
Right.
If they are creating content, they are liable. And by the way, we're not just talking about social media companies. Yeah, as you kind of alluded to, it's everybody. Um, uh, yeah, I would. So you have some experience with this too, right, Brian? Because you were moderating content at one point.
I do. I for a while I had a website where people could get online and they could post anonymous, little comments or whatever. And it wasn't there weren't necessarily threads of conversations. It was more like a bulletin board with little sticky notes, and people could post whatever it was they wanted to post. And I would, in the terms of service, I had it set up where, and I can't remember the exact words, but no racism, no hate speech, whatever else, we didn't call it doxing back then, but the equivalent of doxing. But anything else was fine. And I got into a little bit of an issue where someone, a university professor, was being badmouthed around the internet on different sites, and it was happening on my site. I think he was named, but I think it was only his name. and someone was saying nasty things and he wanted me to take the stuff off, and I wouldn't, because it was, it fit within the terms of service of appropriate content. And he ended up hiring a lawyer to sue me for it. He lost because of Section 230.
Yeah, which is why I thought you'd be all on board. And the way you framed it when you said, and there was another word I can't remember that you used, that it almost reminds me of the way you see sometimes headlines put into newspapers, that you can tell, it seems anyway, that they're taking an opinion. So when you said that they were hiding behind Section 230, what did you mean by that? Like they weren't taking enough responsibility?
Well, to answer that question, I'm going to bring up another aspect to it. Are you familiar with the lawsuit that's up before the Supreme Court right now? Gonzalez versus Google, I think is what it is.
I'm not sure the names, but tell me, and maybe I've heard of it.
So and this year, they're hearing two cases about whether social media can be held liable for aiding and abetting acts of international terrorism when their recommender system is promoting content. And so what had happened was people were arguing that this is about YouTube in particular, that they have like the videos are recommended for you, and they're saying that people are being what's the phrasing where people kind of find their way into some of these fringe groups and terrorist groups. Anyway, being cultivated, I guess, for lack of a word, because I can't remember the actual word. Did YouTube have any responsibility for pushing this individual that was involved in one of these attacks in Paris by guiding them down the rabbit hole of some of these conspiracy theories in pushing these videos? And of course, pushing is sort of it's not really forcing them on them, but they're, hey, you like this video? Here's this other video about extreme religious acts that maybe you would like as well. And so it can guide you in that direction if that's one of the videos that's maybe up next if you want to go and watch it.
Well, yeah, I think that I have some thoughts on that, but what do you think the answer would be? Like, I mean, it's not as if you when you say pushing, or I understand, and I'm okay with the word pushing in that case. I think they're kind of pushing it because they're saying, here's the next one. You seem interested. Why don't you check out this one too? But that probably all happens. It's not like somebody's pushing a button like, oh, I think I got this guy. I think he'll like this other video, and it's a terrible one. It's an algorithm. It's somebody's written some code, and there's no way they could have predicted how it's all going to play out, because there are a billion videos that they couldn't have predicted what they would be. It's an algorithm. I mean, this to me, not knowing much about the case and not knowing much about any of this stuff, I would say it just seems like that would be an impossibility to say to YouTube, like, you should have caught this, because they have an algorithm that leads people down a path for sure. They're trying to entice people. And in the same way that they can't moderate every piece of content, or they can't go and try to censor every piece of content that's out there, because there's just too many videos, there's too much happening, and it's getting uploaded too quickly. There's not enough people in the world well, there are enough people in the world, but we're all not all working on YouTube to try to help them to stop hate speech and racism and terrorism and everything else. So they just can't manage it. So holding them responsible for something like that seems a little bit ridiculous. The algorithm probably works in the background without anybody seeing what's going on. And once they are aware of it, yeah, they probably have some responsibility. But that's the whole purpose of Section 230, is we've got to protect these people. I guess it's not the whole purpose of Section 230. It seems like one of the main purposes that have evolved over time. Even if you had a bulletin board back in the day, if it was really popular, how could you look at every sticky note and try to see what's going on all the time? One thing is when somebody complains, then you have to decide whether to remove it or not. Another thing is getting out in front of everything that's up there and reading it before anybody else reads it. How could you possibly be expected to do that?
Well, and that's a really good point, is that when you had the old bulletin board system, there wasn't necessarily one being promoted by the organization over any other. Maybe you'll do a sort by popularity. What's the most popular threads in these conversations happening right now? But that's not anybody saying this is not anybody within the company organization saying, we want you to see this one next. It's just, what are the ones that are most interactive at the moment? But if I remember a while back reading an article where they were talking about some of these algorithms that were in place in Facebook and some of the other social media companies, and you had reporters kind of exploring what would happen. Not so much they couldn't get to the background. They couldn't get into Facebook and say, show us how this all works. But they said, okay, let's say, for example, that I just had a baby. I'm a little concerned about whether I should vaccinate my child. So you go and you watch some videos on vaccinations, and then you see it. You're going for maybe a balanced view, but you end up in some of these anti-vax views. And then as you're going through anti-vax view after anti-vax after anti-vax, whether it's a group or a video or a post, then the algorithm says, hey, other people that have liked watching these anti-vax videos, there's also a few people that have liked watching some of these flat earth videos. Maybe you should go and check out one. So it shows up a flat earth over on the side. And then you start looking at the flat earth videos, and they say, who else does some of this flat earth stuff, or who's managing the flat earth? Well, that's the governments. The governments are trying to keep you in the dark about the fact that the earth is actually flat. Have you heard about the international cabal of corporations that are trying to and so you end up going down this thread, and pretty soon you're reading about the chemtrails that the planes are spraying over the population to try and keep us all docile, which doesn't seem to be working very well. And you end up,
Brian, even the way that you said that, I think, is overdoing it, because you said, well, who else is interested in this stuff is this group of people that are, they're not saying that. They're saying, hey, you might also be interested in this video.
right.
The algorithm is saying you might also be interested in this video. And it becomes, I get it. What you're trying to find some way to, I don't know, pin something on these guys, but it just is very difficult, because the algorithm is working as much as we want to make it sound like the algorithm is a person, anthropomorphize, make that algorithm into a person that's doing this stuff or explaining something in a certain way. It's just an algorithm. And if you started going down a different path, it would probably lead you towards, flat earth people are crazy, or depending on what your choices were, it would lead you down a different path. So it's not as if the algorithm is set up to lead people to become drones that believe that the government is trying to kill us or something, or that is trying to give us misinformation. It's just leading down the path that you already were going down. If you're liberal, it takes you down a liberal path. If you're conservative, it takes you down a conservative path, and so on. So I just want to make sure that as we say it, we're clear about that fact, that it's just an impersonal algorithm that's doing stuff in the background.
You're right. It is not someone back there saying, "Oh, look where they're going. Let's go and push some of these types of videos on there." It is all based on an algorithm where there's no one actually managing it. And as has been said by many people many times,
no one actually managing it is overstating it too. There are people managing it, but it's nobody making individual decisions about the next video you're going to see. It's an impersonal algorithm, right?
Right. And the purpose of this algorithm is to keep you engaged and keep you involved, regardless of what the content is. And so if the content that keeps you engaged and involved takes you in a dangerous direction, like maybe motivating, or maybe he starts pushing some of these ISIS videos, which is what happened or the reason why they're having this case before the Supreme Court. The individual ended up joining ISIS. Does YouTube bear any responsibility for this individual ending up on ISIS? Should they, maybe instead of trying to keep this individual eyes on YouTube, maybe they should have been more focused on presenting balanced information, both sides, if you will, to make sure that they're getting all perspectives?
I don't know. I will say one thing I'd say to this is your nemesis, Elon Musk, who you seem to be he's the only one who's opened his algorithm up and let everybody see what he's doing. Yeah.
He has. You're right.
It's the whole algorithm. He opened up the algorithm to people.
From the reviews that I was seeing from people that actually understand what they're looking at, what I was seeing, they were saying it gives you some of the information, but still not really clear how the whole thing works, how it interacts. But I don't understand. I mean, he's definitely done more than any other social media company, without a doubt. And so I don't want to diminish what he has done. I just heard some people saying it's still not 100% clear what's happening.
Yeah, I think, and what's interesting is when when you like what you're suggesting is that they start to pick and choose. It's almost as if there's some risk that they might be leading people down a path, and then you're saying, I want them more involved. I want to put more risk on them, because the more they start to try to cater and say, well, if it's just impersonal, like, hey, you like this video? A lot of people like this one too. I mean, that seems pretty harmless as opposed to we don't want you to look at certain things, because the minute they stop, they try to stop people from looking at certain things. It sounds on its face to say, well, they're going to stop people from going to ISIS. Okay, I mean that's good, but then a year ago, people that were that if they try to put something in the algorithm that says, well, you can't look, we're going to try to dissuade from looking at anything, to believe that the COVID that the COVID came from China, or that COVID came from a lab, and then you start picking sides. It just seems to me that then they get into a risk that they're people down the wrong path. So being open seems to make a lot more sense to me than them trying to choose between what they think is right and what they think is wrong. You should just take a step back and just allow people to go where they will. If you end up on maybe they could try to find terrorist sites, but the whole and try to shut those down. Like terrorist video should be shut down anyway. So let's just shut them down. I think that would be fine. But anything beyond that seems very risky, because then you'd be asking, well, why didn't you shut it down sooner? Or why did you let people look at this particular thing and not that particular thing? If it's obvious, yeah, I'm fine with it. But we're both going to have a really different opinion on what's obvious, and other people are going to have an even far way different opinion.
Sure. And from what you said initially, I agree with you. I feel like that they should go completely hands off, and not just in terms of what they'll do actively, but also what they'll do passively through their algorithm. I think that there shouldn't be an algorithm. And
you do?
Yeah, I do.
That seems crazy, because you'd go to YouTube and then you wouldn't be interested. Like, first of all, the way you presented, I think you presented it at first too in a way that was like, you made it seem as if all they were trying to do was get people angry so they'll be more engaged. But I think a lot of what they're trying to do is to get people interested and excited about things. It's not just anger. Like, if you watch a funny video, they're not trying to make you angry. Cat videos took off because people like to be happy. They like to, see something that's funny on there.
Sure.
And that's a big, I watch, there's a what do you call it? Some guy that puts out all these videos. It's called Meme Planet. And a lot of times it'll say clean memes. So we watch it with the kids, because then we just laugh and somebody fell over, or, some silly thing, or they do something funny or scare somebody. Like, it's kind of harmless stuff.
Right.
But that's, I think, what a lot of people spend time on the internet doing. And that's probably a big part of what the algorithm is attempting to do. It's not just trying to stir people up and get them against each other. That is part of it. And maybe it's almost an unintended consequences. They're trying to just give people something fun, and then this unintended consequence, because I mean, I'll agree with you. Social media is dangerous, and it can make it an echo chamber, because they keep, oh, you like that? You probably like this too. Oh, you like that? So there is some risk there, but I think it shouldn't be legally. We should be talking to each other about how to avoid those dangers, and not trying to pass laws because we want people to be censoring content for us.
Well, and I think it's helpful at this point to go back and look at those three categories that I mentioned. You got the publisher, the distributor, and the platform. The publisher being like books and magazines, distributor like a bookstore or a newsstand, platform like a telephone company. And so with the platform, those telephone companies, they have no involvement in what you and I are talking about on the telephone. Right? You and I are just talking. That's it. They are just the conduit by which our conversation happens. And I feel like once you start throwing in an algorithm, you're no longer just that unbiased, unopinionated conduit. You're now closer to a distributor, like a bookstore. And that bookstore is now saying, hey, these are the books that we like. A bookstore doesn't have all the books. A library doesn't have all the books. They just have books that they think are popular, that books that they think people will want to buy. So just in terms of those books they've already done a bit to decide maybe what you would like. If you're going in to look for a book, all you can choose from are the books that are on the shelves. And then they'll have their recommendations. They'll have some suggestions. These are the books that that Jane likes, and the books that Frank likes, and so now they're doing a little bit of promotion. So I feel like these social media companies, with their algorithm, are closer to the responsibility of a distributor than to that unopinionated, uninfluencing platform. And I'd mentioned to you before that I had gotten off of Twitter and that I started using Mastodon, which is another Twitter-like social media company. They don't have an algorithm there. And what's interesting is it's a little bit difficult to get used to at first, because we're so used to just kind of scrolling through the feed and waiting for more information to be presented to us. On Mastodon, if you don't tell it what you're looking for, you don't see anything. There's nothing there. You have to start following people. You have to start following hashtags. And until you start to decide what sort of content you want to see in your feed is empty. And if you don't have a lot of content that you want to follow, your feed gets old very quickly. So you have total control, but because we're so accustomed to having it fed to us, it's a little bit difficult to get used to.
So you're saying that somebody went to Mastodon that started to look into anti-vax stuff, and then, well, I guess, yeah, because they would never, then they wouldn't be led to the flat Earth because they didn't search unless they searched for flat Earth, I guess.
Unless someone that they're following is also a flat earther, and then they might get some of that flat earth content.
Yeah, those are differences, and I think the public and each individual and the market will decide which people like better. I think it's certainly a trade-off, because if you go to some place that has um, an algorithm, then you'll be given stuff that you're probably interested in, and that can be good. You're gonna see other funny people or other people that I don't know. You're going to get presented with information that you're probably going to like. And so I don't necessarily have a problem with it. I haven't tried Mastodon. I might like that as well. I don't know. But I guess it doesn't really answer the question is what they should be doing or why that's necessarily a problem. If there's an algorithm that says, hey, we'll try to show you what you'd like, I think that's fine. I mean, Mastodon probably has something that's similar. Like when they say, hey, you search for something and it's something that you might like, well, they've got to have some way to tag that stuff and figure out, like, is somebody then going through all their different posts and being like, well, this is somewhat conservative and whatever, I don't know. Is it just keywords that they're using
Just
to show
keywords,
you new stuff?
hashtags, and people. So you can search, if you want to find, do a search for libertarians. You can do a search for the hashtag libertarians or just the phrase libertarians, and then it'll pop up and it'll show you either individuals that have put that in their profile or individuals that have posted that have used that word or that hashtag. So then you can decide if that's a hashtag you want to follow, or if you want to follow those particular individuals. So then those start to populate the feed.
Well, Brian, I guess I would say this. We can debate whether one of those is better or worse than the others, but what Section 230 says if you create content, then you're liable for anything bad that is created.
Right.
If you moderate content, then you're not liable. And an algorithm to me is not moderating content, is moderating content. You're just saying
the moderation, I'm not sure if, and this is the hard part, is that moderation wasn't really a thing when that, at least the way that we understand it now, moderation.
You were moderating content.
What's that?
You were moderating content
by my terms of service. That was how that I laid out exactly how it was. So I was.
You just said moderation wasn't a thing, but you were moderating content, as were other places.
But it wasn't a thing when Section 230 was created, because I don't think moderation is in the language of the original bill. It's something that now is part of the debate.
Oh yeah, the way I've read it is that if you're moderating content, let me see yeah, Justin Amash, a former representative, said that if New York Times and Washington Post moderate content, they're not liable. If Twitter creates content, it's liable. So it doesn't matter who you are, it matters what you're doing. If you're just moderating content, which is what you were doing, you have these people that can come up and put stuff on your website. You're a moderator. You allow them to be up there or not to be up there. You could remove people according to terms of service. That is moderation. And you're not, if you're just moderating or just hosting, then you're not liable. You're liable when you create content. That's the difference.
So in the definition of a publisher, they were saying that, for example, a newspaper, an online newspaper, they are responsible specifically for the articles that they publish. The publisher is not responsible for the content that comes out in the comment section.
Right. Whatever they create, because what they publish, they are creating.
Right.
Because they're the ones that are, they have editors that go through these stories. They're hiring the people. It is their content. They're hiring people to write for their newspaper. They are creating content. That is why they are liable. But when there's a comment in the comment sections, they can't be, it would be unreasonable to ask them to go through the comment section every second of every day to try to make sure that nobody says anything that's inappropriate or that's illegal or anything else. So they're not liable for that. In fact, when they have started to do this sort of thing, and I was reading an article where there was a carve out in a law that they passed where they were finding or putting in place new ways to enforce or sex abuse and things like that. And there was a carve out for Section 230. And so a lot of different websites, I think it was like Craigslist, they did away with their personal section because they just couldn't moderate. They couldn't go to those personal ads and be always watching that nothing illegal ever happened on their website. So they had to do away with it completely. It reduces free speech because it forces that some of these internet companies to do away with some of the services that they provide because there's so much risk if we're not going to allow them this protection from Section 230.
Right. Yeah. And with the evolution of social media as we have it now, the question is, and the Supreme Court will hopefully bring a little clarity to this, how much responsibility does social media have when they're not as impartial as a phone service was when they just allowed the conversation to happen? They are doing a little bit of moderation. They are doing a little bit of promotion of certain types of content to try and keep you engaged. And so does that push them beyond the neutrality of a platform into the section of maybe either a distributor or a publisher? And so the Supreme Court will give us their opinion on that one soon.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it'd be interested. So explain that a little further, like a bookstore. Because you're saying they're not liable unless somebody told them about it, and then they are liable? Or what are you saying there?
They're not liable for what's in the books, but if someone comes up to them and says, you have this book that is promoting illegal activity. Let's say back, there used to be a thing back when, Hustler magazine was sort of on the edge of free speech, and they would go and get their magazine put into bookstores, and then the bookstore the owner would get arrested, and then they would go and fight the issue as a free speech issue, as to whether you can or can't, whether the bookstore owner is responsible for that sort of content. And now, of course, Hustler isn't illegal. But pornography has always been on that cusp of, what's being entirely available to everybody or being limited to a certain portion of the population, and how you limit it. Does it, can a town outlaw pornography altogether, or do you just outlaw it in certain avenues, certain venues, like a library?
Yeah, it's almost as if you're proposing that um, that we have this more stringent requirement for social media companies because they sometimes promote certain videos or certain posts or whatever. And I think I think that would be problematic because it would be impossible for them to keep on top of the way the algorithm works in such different, there's going to be so many different, they're trying to give people what they think people are going to like. And at times people like bad things. So at times it's going to promote things that we disagree with or maybe even are illegal. That to me is one of the main reasons we should have Section 230 is to protect against the fact that they're not going to be able to moderate that perfectly. So either it's almost as if you're saying, well, then we should do away completely with algorithms and promotion, and I don't see a reason for that. I just think that's a little bit of of government overreach. I don't see that we need to do that.
So you're in favor of keeping Section 230 and all the protections that it provides?
Yep.
Okay. I would like to see a two-tier system, and that is that if someone is going to fall under the category of the protections of Section 230, then they're not pushing you in the direction of any sort of content with an algorithm beyond what you're maybe searching or investigating for. If you don't want that sort of protection, as you as the platform doesn't want that sort of protection, then they can go, then they'll have a better, stronger business model because they can use that algorithm to keep you engaged and keep you involved. But with the protections of Section 230, I think it's going to be, I would imagine the way I'm describing it anyway, as, not as business friendly. And so the different level of business.
But so you're saying that you wouldn't have the protections of Section 230 if you have an algorithm that promotes certain videos? Or
yeah, and that's what the people are arguing that in their case before the Supreme Court right now, is that the algorithm that was used on YouTube negates the protections that Section 230 provided.
Well, as always, I think we should think about what the unintended, or maybe for some people, intended consequences of this are, because I think that would make it next to impossible to have people to allow those companies to have algorithms, or at least ones that work very well, because there would be so much risk, and it would take away it's almost like we're saying, well, okay, we don't want them, so we'll put this two-tiered system in place, but really we're just not going to allow you to do it because there'd be so much legal risk for those companies that had an algorithm. How could you possibly? There's no way that you could moderate the content and avoid any legal issues, because it just eventually creeps into the internet. That's the way that it works. It creeps into life, and because they're just putting this information out there, there's going to be people that behave illegally, and for them to be the police, with the millions of posts and tweets and videos that are coming through there, is an unreasonable ask.
Yeah, we'll. I think we're at a point where these questions are going to start to, they've already been at the surface of the topics of conversation, but I think with the Supreme Court case, it's going to become a little bit even more so. So we'll see how things go. And on that, we're going to move off of the theme of free speech, I think. I don't think we had anything else on this vein, and find a new topic of conversation for next week. So think about it, and we'll talk soon.
Okay. Sounds good, Brian.
We hope you learned something in this episode of Brother versus Brother, a podcast about difficult conversations. We also hope that you enjoyed it enough to subscribe to the podcast. You can help us by spreading the word. Share this episode on your favorite social media so that others will have an opportunity to experience it as well. You can also support us by donating through Patreon. This information and more can be found on our website, broconvo.com, and on our various social media accounts. Thank you.